Our great pleasure introducing to you our guest from Mozambique, Professor Carlos Nuno Castel-Branco. Professor Castel-Branco has been attending at an invitation a short course that the Young Resource Center, or as we call it in Kiswahili, Kawazi la Mwalimu Nyerere, has organized. This was a 5-day course on financialization of land and ecology. It is a full-time course with 25 participants, among whom we had young lecturers from universities, some young intellectuals, and also people active in various our civil society organizations. And Professor gave us 3 lectures laying the theoretical basis of the current phase of the international capitalist economy and how our countries fit into this scenario. Professor has an interesting history behind him. At the age of 15, he directed the adult literacy program of Frelimo. From 1977, when he was 17 years old, he was a member of the Mozambican People's Liberation Army, which was armed wing of Frelimo. And of course, all of us know Frelimo, because Frelimo was based in Dar es Salaam, supported very closely by Mwalimu Nyerere. After that, he founded and became the first director of Institute for Social and Economic Studies. And I had the honor to visit this institute in 2009. It's really an excellent institute doing basic research, much more than consultancy reports, which we are used to. He also is an associate professor at the University of Eduardo Mondlane. You know Eduardo Mondlane was the first leader of Frelimo, and Mondlane was assassinated actually in Dar es Salaam. And he's also the associate professor in Lisbon School of Economics and Management. So we had this great privilege to host Professor at this training course at NRC. Professor, in your last lecture, which was fascinating, you talk about the public debt in Mozambique and compared it with the debt or the crisis of Greece and tried to situate that in what you call the financialization of this phase of capitalism. I would like us to discuss more on the issue of public debt because it's so relevant to all our countries. We also have been grappling here in Tanzania with the rising public debt. The last count, it had almost become 40% of our gross domestic product, and it keeps rising. Now, what does this mean for our countries? If you could give us some background for the public debt in Mozambique, and how do you see it? How do you see this?
Thank you. First of all, before answering your question directly, I'd like to say how grateful I am to have been invited to this course and the very incredibly good debates that we had, and how they are stimulating not only intellectually, academically, but also politically, because you can see the strength of the intellect and action that goes into the desire for economic, social, and political transformation, and that always feeds, supports the efforts that we try to make, to concentrate for that purpose. So thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, going straight into your question now. Debt is not necessarily a problem. Debt can be a process, that can be a resource actually, that can be used by the economies to create new opportunities. Actually, capitalism is built on credit and debt. That it's necessary for advancement of production, innovation, and so on. The question is, in recent times, over the last couple of decades, capitalism has been accumulating, capitalism has been growing in terms of financial transactions, and not necessarily in terms of jobs, production, so real accumulation. And debt has been used as a business more than an advancement in the possibilities of developing production, innovation, employment, wealth, real wealth that can be shared by producers. In the particular case of Mozambique, Mozambique had a deep economic crisis back in the 1980s, and as a result, we engaged in a stabilization program with the IMF, and for 25 years, the Mozambican government wasn't allowed to contract debt, commercial debt. We had concessional debt dominatingly, and which is debt that is contracted with the IMF, with the World Bank, and with other multilateral agencies in very concessional terms. So it means that interest rates are very low, the maturity periods are very long, there are grace periods during which you don't pay back the capital and so on. So this is very concessional debt. In order to put it in simple terms, is cheap debt. Now, the beginning of this century, so from 2005 onwards, commercial debt in Mozambique started to rise. First was the domestic debt. Domestic debt was all of it commercial. And what was the domestic debt about? There was a part of it related with the unpredictability of aid. Aid was a dominant source of income to finance investment, public investment. So the unpredictability of aid created short-term cash flow problems that led the government to incur in short-term commercial debt in the domestic market. But increasingly, the domestic market was starting to be used to finance an expansionary public expenditure. And so the domestic financial debt grew fast from 2% of, from a very low levels, it's 2% of the debt stock to about 14–16% of debt stock. But the domestic debt is all commercial and very expensive, because in order to sell the debt to the financial system, to attract resources for the government, the interest on domestic debt are very high. So there are two implications there. One is that a small proportion of the debt stock is very expensive, and so represents a very large proportion of the debt service. And the second problem is that because interests are so high relative to to the potential returns on other investments that banks may make, banks started to be more and more attracted by the debt of the government, and government debt became the single most important business of the banks. They yield higher returns than any other business in the country. So when we look now at the structure of bank portfolios in Mozambique, we see about 30% of these is negotiation of debt bonds. So the claims on future government revenue that government has sold in order to raise money to finance the deficit. And about 25–26% is luxury consumption goods, household consumption that is mostly dominated by luxury housing and so on. So that has fueled a speculative bubble in real estate. And then you have about 20–25% is trade. So industry, agriculture, fishing, and so transport and communication and so on have been squeezed out of the activities of the commercial banks. Of course, it has a big implication. Is yes, you create wealth, but is fictitious wealth. Is wealth in the hands of banks speculating on government bonds. Then that wealth is converted into luxury consumption, and so it doesn't result in expansion of the productive capacity and employment and development of real wages in the economy. So this is one of the implications.
Right.
But from 2010, there is a new dimension of commercial debt, and that dimension was a very, very fast increase of external commercial debt. So the IMF relaxed its controls on government contracting external commercial debt. And there was a big, very large debt space that had been created. What is the debt space? The debt space is what is considered to be the space for sustainable debt, so debt that can be paid without significant sacrifices in the economy. So we didn't for 25 years contract external commercial debt, but GDP grew. So the space between the proportion of GDP that can be contracted as debt has a very significant value. So if the sustainability rate is fixed at 40% of GDP, so we say the commercial external debt is still sustainable as long as it doesn't go beyond 40% of GDP. Over the 25 years I mentioned, GDP grew 7 times. So that space also grew 7 times. So 40% of a very large GDP is a lot of money. So the government considered that space as a kind of a mine. Is a mine of gold or a mine of any other strategic resource. In one mine, you make a hole in the wall and you extract the resource. In the debt space, the space is there, the wall is there. You can fill it with debt. So it was like mining the debt space, taking away the emptiness that is there and filling it with debt. And why was it happening? It wasn't happening for the purpose of broadening the basis of production and employment and development, but it was, when we look at the structure of that debt, it was very focused on promoting the minerals and energy complex and other very large commodity production for exports, primary commodity production for exports. What was the role played by that process in promoting the extractive economy? It was first to build infrastructures for the mining and energy industries and for the general commodity production. Second, it was to build services for the same activities. And those infrastructures and services are not available for the economy as a whole. They are available for those sectors. And together, these infrastructures and services represent about 62–63% of the expenditure that justifies the increasing external commercial debt. Then there is another factor, which is the government gave guarantees to private debt. And those guarantees represent roughly 25% of the debt stock. So we have here a situation in which about 88% of all the debt stock is actually associated with a very small number of firms and activities concentrated on minerals, energy, and commodities to export that employ a very small number of people, employ roughly 25 to 30,000 people, represent the bulk of GDP growth. About 75–80% of GDP growth comes from these sectors, represent the bulk of exports. About 95% of exports comes from these sectors, and represent the bulk of private investment in Mozambique. About 90% of all private investment goes into these sectors. So the government used the debt space to promote a system of accumulation, particularly focused on this mining and energy and other commodities, which didn't have a significant multiplier effect to the rest of the economy, didn't create jobs in a significant number, didn't develop linkages in significant number to the rest of the economy. And the other element of this is that the dynamics of that debt also stimulated a real estate bubble and a speculative financial system. So the question is not only whether we can pay or not. Now we can't, because debt is now more than 100% of GDP. So the question is not only whether we can pay or not. The question is, what is the impact of that process of development, the application of resources and so on the structures of accumulation that emerge in the economy, and what are the impact of such structures on well-being, on welfare, on the possibilities of people benefiting from growth. So this is the question about debt. It's not only how much debt, it's not only whether you can fiscally pay for it or not, is the overall implication in the dynamics of accumulation. So now we have a speculative process of accumulation and a very narrow process of real accumulation. And these two together create the conditions for very fast growth up to a certain point without poverty reduction, without job creation, and so on. And recently, because of the fast accumulation of debt, the bubble exploded. So Mozambique moved very quickly in a matter of months, a few months, from being a country, an economy where the international financial markets looked for in this region, to becoming a rogue economy nobody wants to touch. Yeah. And this is the danger when we look at the issue of debt, saying, oh, we are still within the parameters, we still can pay it financially, and so on. Because we need to remember two things. First, the ability to pay debt is politically defined. Because what we mean when we say we can pay debt, it means that we can squeeze other areas of the society and the economy to pay debt.
Right.
That's what we are saying, basically. So when we say 40% of GDP is fine, we can pay the debt, we are within the parameters. It means that we don't mind sacrificing education, health, roads, sanitation, broad-based development, financing of development of cooperatives in the rural areas, and so on, because we don't mind, because we have other priorities. For example, gold or oil or gas, and we are incurring in debt in order to finance those sectors, and we don't mind squeezing the social capacities for labor and economic reproduction, or the capacities to create a broad-based development in order to pay for that. So we are defining priorities in the economy. We are defining in the economy priorities of who is going to win and who is going to pay for those that win. So we are doing that. The second point is that exactly because of that, debt, as any other form of creation of resources or mobilization of resources and deployment in the economy, structures systems of accumulation, structures of accumulation, dynamics and relations of accumulation. And in doing that, we need to look at where are we going. It's not enough to say we are going fast is fine. Because if we are going fast in the wrong direction, we are getting very, very fast there to the wrong destiny.
Right, right.
So fast is not the answer. The answer is which direction are we going?
Right.
And these are the two big lessons, I would say, from the Mozambican debt problem.
What you have said, Professor, has a lot of resonance in Tanzania, although you are not quite there. Because as I said, if you go by GDP, our debt is about 40% of GDP. It has been rising though. And you have pointed out three trends which you also notice in Tanzania. First, increasing commercial debt, private debt. If you look at domestic debt in Tanzania, 51% is from commercial banks, private commercial banks, holding through government bonds, treasury bonds, and so on. And the second point that you have been mentioning, which I think is very important, while debt in itself is not a problem, okay, because much of the capitalist economy actually runs on credit. The question is, where is this debt going? Is it going into producing, or is it going into speculating? And I was just looking at the figures in Tanzania. 30% of the debt, it goes into minerals and energy. 31% into infrastructure. And I think you pointed out very well that this infrastructure is also connected with minerals and energy. I wish we had similar figures for Tanzania. 20% goes into balance of payments and budget support. You see? Because in that support is indirectly connected with repaying debt. Sure. Okay? Only 5% goes into agriculture. Only 5% goes into industry. Only 5% goes into education. So the debt that we are incurring doesn't go into productive sector. It goes into enclaves, okay, where the foreign investment is concentrated. 95% of foreign direct investment in Tanzania is in mining. Almost 39 to 40% of exports is gold. Okay. It has overtaken agriculture and commodities. Okay. So you find that we are sort of reinforcing in a new form the kind of export enclave that we used during colonial time.
Exactly.
You know? But worse still, it seems to me, without using very strong terms, that we are becoming a kind of enslaved to debt, because creditors, like Shylocks, that insist on their pound of flesh. And we are not able to pay debt, they will be prepared to give you more money to pay the debt. Currently, some figures that I saw in the newspaper, our debt repayment, debt servicing, has almost become 75% of our revenue collection. Now what does that mean? As you pointed out, and this is sometimes not seen, the connection, that if you are to repay your debt at that level, which means you have to starve other sectors, very important sectors, okay? Education, health, sanitation, so as to be able to pay debt. Another very important point, I think, and that is so crucial for us, because we have been talking a lot in Tanzania. We have been told that the economy is growing, most consistent over the last 10 years, over 7%. And people keep asking, economy is growing, but how come we are becoming poorer? I mean, This is put in simple terms, but it starkly represents the reality. Economy is growing, we are becoming poorer, and we are becoming more and more jobless. Unemployment is increasing. Again, if you look at the figures, you find that the enclave, where much of the investment goes, where much of the debt goes, mining sector, employs very few people. At the moment in Tanzania, roughly, the people employed in the mining sector is half or less than half of people employed in domestic service. I mean, domestic service employs more people than the mining sector. Okay. And even industries employ much less. At the moment, our industry employs less people than it used to employ by the time Mwalimu retired. And this is an expanding economy. This is a growing economy. So you have the famous jobless growth. Okay? So growth sounds very hollow to the people, and people are questioning. And I think there's a limit to how far it can be rationalized and justified. And the point is that, yes, look, if we do not repay our debts, we will not be credible. Okay? People will not advance loans to us. So it becomes kind of vicious circle. Okay? So growth sounds very hollow to the people, and people are questioning. And I think there's a limit to how far it can be rationalized and justified. And the point is that, yes, look, if we do not repay our debts, we will not be credible. Okay? People will not advance loans to us. So it becomes kind of vicious circle. Now, if we sort of take the scenario in its most dramatic expression, which was Greece, how do you connect that with the kind of crisis that Greece faced? Because for the first time, I think Europe was shaken. That what used to happen in the periphery, in our countries, as chicken came home to roost. Okay? And it was a real crisis. It was a real crisis of the whole Eurozone. And the way it was resolved, in whose interest, and what kind of lessons we can draw from this. Because it's connected both with financialization and financialization of debt. Okay. We have examples in Africa where debt was resolved and so on and so forth, So it becomes business in itself. So maybe if you could connect that, and what lessons we can draw.
Well, there are a few points there that we need to look at seriously. And in Tanzania, you should look at Mozambique. You should study the case of Mozambique very serious. We are just neighbors. And during the Liberation War, we got a huge support from Tanzania. Now, in this economic crisis, unwillingly, because we didn't want the economic crisis in the first place, but unwillingly, we can give huge support to Tanzania by giving you lessons of what not to do.
Yes.
But the question, you mentioned one point about the growth patterns in which growth is hollow, and so you have growth focused on one hand, focused on enclaves, very narrow enclaves, that are of interest for large international capital and their domestic associates.
Right.
And also the growth of speculative economy that also is related to multinational interests as well as their domestic associates. And part of the multinational interests are banks, because banks are lending this money, even if they know that this money is financing hollow growth. They know that, but they are still lending because it's business. So they are actually making money out of our debt, of accumulation of debt, and out of the expectation that our economy is going to fail.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and
not
then,
that our economy is going to succeed.
Well, if it succeeds, then they reap the benefits of gas, gold, and so on. If it doesn't, they will reap the benefits of lending more money to pay the debt. Yeah. So they try to save on both sides. There is an interesting point you raised, is how far can we justify this growth? But I will add another question, is how far this growth can actually go.
Okay.
Because in the case of Mozambique, the bubble has already exploded. Exploded in a debt crisis, the debt crisis was exacerbated by the fact that the guarantees given by the government to the private sector, which amount to 2.5 billion US dollars, or about 20% of the debt stock.
What kind of private sector was this?
It was actually is in many cases an unknown private sector, because these are firms that have been created that actually hide a lot of things that we still don't know what they are. Three projects alone account for $2 billion, and it is a fishing company called Ematun that was supposed to fish tuna. That company was the lending to that company was about 850 million US dollars. We know that about 250 million US dollars were used to buy boats for fishing. Where are the other 600 million dollars? We don't know.
Okay.
And then there are two other companies related to the gas industry, and they are supposed to be in logistics and in security for the gas industry that is not yet developed. But we have already received the loans for those companies that have never been created legally. And this is about $1.2 billion together for the two companies. And so we need a very serious audit, independent forensic audit, to really understand what are these companies and what this money has gone to. But this not only is hidden debt, but is also illegal in the sense that the government didn't go to parliament and the government didn't follow the budget laws in assuming this debt and guaranteeing the debt of these private companies. So it became a scandal, a domestic scandal and an international scandal. And so the debt crisis, exacerbated by this scandal, led first donors to stop supporting the Mozambican budget. And it still, aid represents about a third of the Mozambican budget and about 50% of all expenditure in public sector areas. Some of that doesn't go through the budget. The second, donors have suspended the financing of the budget, not necessarily aid, but the financing of the budget. So they continue their projects and so on. But it means that the government doesn't have the money to finance its own expenditure. And we have to notice that the government is still the largest customer in the country. And so firms in Mozambique depend also on contracts with the government, because the government is the biggest spender, the government is the biggest customer. So when that is cut, it's not only the government cannot spend and there are implications in the delivery of public services, there is a negative multiplying effect throughout the economy, because construction firms are not paid, they can't build, and firms that provide bedding for hospitals or chairs and desks for schools cannot do it, and so on and so forth. So this is one point. But also, Mozambique now is a rogue financial state. Therefore, the value of the bonds on the companies, private companies that were guaranteed by the state have fallen very sharply. And so you can't recover that money just by selling the bonds, because they have almost no value. On the other hand, the premium on borrowing in the financial markets has gone very high. So interest rates for lending to Mozambique now are very high. So it became extremely expensive and risky to invest in Mozambique. So even the enclave economy is suffering from that, because this big company is saying, well, we cannot invest. The financial cost of investing in Mozambique has gone through the roof. The bond guarantees on Mozambican debt has gone through the floor.
Yeah.
So it's very risky. We cannot do that. So Mozambique is between a wall and a hard rock. Yeah, it's a very difficult situation. The way out of it is having a very serious audit of our debt that may give us the chance to argue that 20 to 25% of the debt stock is actually illicit debt, is odious debt that we shouldn't pay. But if we don't pay, who is going to pay for that? Because someone is responsible. And it's not only Mozambicans, it's not only the previous government, it's also the banks that have done that because they have done that illegally. So they have to pay for that. How? Do they have assets? Can they be stripped of their assets? Can we sell those assets? Can we recover the money? But this is something that the Mozambican economy and Mozambican people shouldn't be sacrificed for. Once that is done, we can try to restructure the remaining debt in ways that it doesn't weigh that much in the budget, so that the government is not the possibilities of the government to pursue broader social and economic policies are not destroyed. Now, the guarantees for the private sector, for the private companies, those $2.5 million I mentioned, are the most expensive part of the commercial debt. Alone, they represent an annual service of about 340 million US dollars, which is roughly 6% of the budget.
This means that they already defaulted and therefore the government has to pay their debts.
Yeah, they don't exist. They have never produced anything.
Okay.
So the time for paying the debt came, for paying the tranches of the debt came, and so of course they defaulted, and so Mozambique had to pay. But now Mozambique has defaulted because we don't have money to pay.
Right.
And so what if we don't face the problem in a proper way? What is going to happen is that we will have to pay. We don't have money to pay it if we continue with if we try to continue with delivering of some social services. Of course, the budget always has money to pay debt. The question is, in order to pay this increasing debt service, we have to squeeze the rest of society. And Mozambique is not a rich country, a country well developed, in which you can squeeze here and squeeze there and things continue to work. Mozambique, as many African countries, probably as Tanzania, is operating on the margin, on every single thing. We are on the margin of providing education, on the margin of providing health services and so on. So any squeeze in those sectors just makes the sector to collapse. Right. And the services that are provided are also of not high quality at the moment. So you squeeze it, they become of very bad quality. And there are significant implications in terms of short-term ability for social reproduction, but also in terms of long-term. Because if we destroy the education system in order to pay
the debt, a whole generation.
Yeah, it's an entire generation that is out of the system. Yeah, is the future generation in a world that is evolving scientifically, technologically, and so on. So we are going to be further and further behind the rest of the world, and these are things that cannot be done. So I don't even see how the banking system in the world is going to look at Mozambique and say, we are going to finance your debt indefinitely, and so just making money out of your debt. Because Mozambique is very risky. The only way to do that is if Mozambique is stripped of strategic assets, and which are gas, coal, and some other minerals.
Right.
So it means that Mozambique would actually take its strategic assets, transform those strategic assets in guarantees for the international financial market, in order to get continuous financing of our debt. What is the meaning of that? Is that Mozambique misses gives away resources
And a
that can-
possible source of future,
development,
Exactly.
we do it.
Yes.
And not only future development of Mozambique, but of the region.
Of the region, yes, yes.
We do it, but we do it not for development, just for paying debt,
For paying
just
debt.
for guaranteeing the
Yes,
influx,
yes,
the continuous influx of resources to pay debt. So we are just, it's like a car driving in a road where it has rained a lot. So the wheels keep going, but the car is in the same place.
Yeah.
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 And the time is flowing. So we are later and later.
All the other
and
cars
later.
pass by you.
Everybody passes us. Yeah.
Yes.
And we are still there.
Yes.
And we use all of that energy just to pay that.
Right.
Now, so this is one possibility. Another possibility is some oligarch in the world, and there are many, can decide to buy our debt. You can think of these speculators in oil or gas or so in the world that are very rich, and the Mozambican economy is Mozambique's GDP is only 14 or 15 billion US dollars. When we talk about banks, for example, in the global crisis, the governments spent about 14 trillion US dollars to finance the rescue packages for banks. Of the 20 most important banks that were rescued, the smallest one of those 20 are the debt. It's not the total value of the bank. The debt is 10 times bigger than the Mozambican GDP. The smallest of those banks. So there is financial muscle in the world for someone to buy Mozambique's debt. China can do that. Some Russian can do that, or whatever. Saudi Arabia or so. And when you do, you may devalue a little bit the face value of the Mozambican economy and Mozambican debt, basically. But what you get is gas, coal, and so on, strategic resources for the future.
Absolutely.
So it might actually give an incentive for someone to come and buy. If it happens, what will happen is Mozambique is not going only to be a debt slave, it's going to be a slave or one or two or a consortium of international capitals.
Yes.
So we are going to be called not anymore Republic of Mozambique, but it's going to be Republic of Mozambique Incorporated. Yeah, and that is very dangerous. It would not be the first time it happens. During the Latin American debt crisis, they tried to buy these oligarchs and consortiums of oligarchs, tried to buy debt in Argentina, tried to buy debt in different countries. And for example, in the case of Argentina, the Argentinian government went to international tribunals to prevent that from happening. Otherwise, you lose completely your sovereignty.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so the question here is how to face the problem. And in order to face the problem, not to follow the Greek tragedy, yeah, in which they had debt created by speculation, and speculation led the banks to fail. The government assumed the private debt, so the government itself went into debt crisis and then started to borrow to pay that debt. All the borrowing went for debt repayments rather than development of production, and therefore the banks are now making money on the Greek debt. We can't go that way, definitely, and we don't have the conditions to go that way. But we cannot be stripped of resources that can help us in the future for development, and we cannot strip our people of their hopes for development.
Right.
So what we have to do, we have to make sure that we don't pay the illegal debt, but in order to do that, we need a very clear forensic audit that identifies what happened, where the money is, who are the culprits, and so on, and measures are taken there, and then we try to cancel that. But we also need to understand how could this thing have happened. to learn lessons from there. And then think about restructuring the remaining debt, because a lot of the remaining debt is concessional, so we can actually renegotiate it a bit. And develop a refocus resources in terms of broadening the base of production. One important point is in this process is going to be to rethink to review the portfolio of public investment, because public investment is partly responsible for that, because it is so focused on the narrow base of minerals and energy.
Yeah. And
then also mobilize fiscal resources from the big economic groups, because big economic groups get very, very huge tax incentives. They don't pay anything. And we can mobilize from them, even in the times of crisis, we can mobilize from them fiscal revenue that is equivalent to the growth of domestic debt. And so we can have resources in the hands of the state for financing other areas of economic and social development, stop the domestic debt from growing, and therefore minimize the speculative incentive for the financial system in Mozambique. So there are things that can be done, but any of these measures is highly political.
Exactly.
It's not a technical thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's highly political, require both the political will as well as the political foresight to be able to do those things. And most important of all, you require the support of your people.
Exactly.
To be able to stand this. So if I may sum up, I think Tanzania has a lot to learn from this. For instance, you talk about guaranteeing private debts. Currently, there's a lot of pressure on the state to support the private sector. And I can see this coming. Unfortunately, our economists are not doing enough research to let us know. Because I know the government is already guaranteeing some private debts. And what is interesting, that even some of the concessional loans that you get from, for example, World Bank, is channeled through private banks.
Exactly.
Okay? It's channeled through private banks. I mean, someone in the last course told us that there was a World Bank loan, of course guaranteed by the government. World Bank gives loan to the government. But it went to the private banks to finance mortgages for housing. Okay? And the housing bubble, I mean, is very unstable. It's very volatile. Okay? It can burst any time. And the government is left with the debt. And this foresight, which is already almost happening, and you can see, in Tanzania again, we have this big euphoria about having found gas and constructing pipelines and so on, which is fine. It can guarantee our development and future development. But if, God forbid, if it comes to a situation where actually that you pawn to be able to pay your debt and to guarantee your debt, then as you say, we are losing our future.
Sure.
Okay? And losing future, you are losing your country. That's what it means. And this time around, not losing your country to be colonized by other states, but other private oligarchs.
Exactly.
Okay? And the oligarchs are in a position to buy your country. Okay? And so all the hopes that you create, all the expectations to create, and the base of expectations, you sort of continue borrowing. Okay? And then you have to mortgage your pipelines and your oil and even resources which are not yet exploited. Okay? I mean, this is a scenario which is so fearful, so frightening. And I think this is why I'm saying that we really have to draw lessons. And I'm very happy to say that, as you said, rightly pointed out, that we can draw lessons from Mozambique. And I think in this situation, I feel, and this kind of, if I may sum up, that more than governments and people, governments are very short sights. They don't see very far all over the world. And the politicians too. Okay? The longest they can think of is in terms of the next election. Okay? But I think it is the work of the committed intellectuals, to raise the awareness of society as a whole, of what does all this mean. And that is where we require solidarity. That is where you have to exchange. So I'm very happy that you are here, and I hope that this kind of cooperation, this kind of solidarity continues. And with Mozambique, given our history, So our interaction, our exchange is not simply intellectual exchange. It is really an exchange in terms of fighting for our freedoms.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
So I hope that we will continue with this cooperation. And as you remember in our course, we told some of our young people, you know, to ask the right questions. Okay, because most of the things that you have been saying, I'm sure similar analysis can be done for Tanzania, but we are not doing it. Because as I was telling you, and this has happened all over our countries, that this neoliberal intervention has really destroyed our universities.
Yeah.
Okay? The universities exist, but they have destroyed them. Basic research is not being done. We have forgotten to ask the right questions. You know, literally, this new generation has forgotten to ask the right questions because we don't have the continuity from the previous tradition that we established in the liberation struggle, that we established in the immediate post-independence period, okay, intellectually. So that has, and I think in that respect, it seems to imperialism is very successful. Imperialism is more successful ideologically and intellectually than anything else, you know. And I think we have to reclaim and recapture. You see,
It's true.
you see.
Where you're talking about the power of companies,
Yeah.
let me just give you a small example. It's a small one in a larger context.
Yeah.
I was once arguing with a member of the board of a mining company, big mining company in the north of Mozambique, about the taxation system. So they don't pay taxes in Mozambique. They came to Mozambique as a Irish company, and then in the middle of the way they became based in a tax haven in Mauritius or Maldives, and they disappeared from the radar. They are just there taking the heavy sands and so on. And I was talking to one of their members of the board about that, and he said, well, you may be right about the taxes. We are not paying taxes, and the Mozambican economy should benefit from so the Mozambican economy should benefit. That's a little bit like, yeah, we will consider where the Mozambican economy should benefit from this, but this is our resource. We gave them the right to come here and take it. And then he said, but paying taxes is not the solution. You don't have any a solution with that, because the government doesn't know anything. They can't do anything with the taxes. What you probably should do is make us representatives of the population in the area where we operate. And so the population talk to us about their problems, and we talk to government. We have a lot of power with the government. We can go to the government and say, we want this and we want, and the government is going to give it to us. If the district council or assembly or go and talk to the government, nobody listens. So why pay taxes? Just give us the power. Yeah? And I looked at this thing, yeah, and it was, well, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So this century, yeah, 21st century. And I look at him and say, well, this is a return to the majestic companies of the early colonial period.
Yes, yes,
yeah?
yes.
And this is not the worst thing. The worst thing is that you will see many of the public institutions thinking about it. Yeah, my reaction is immediately, wow, what is that? But you see many civil servants and public institutions listen to that and say, well, that's not a bad idea. Well, let's think about that.
Yes.
So what are they thinking? Yeah. And it's this point that we have reached in which the political sovereignty and the political articulation of the interests of the people mean absolutely nothing in comparison with the interests of large capital.
Large companies, yes.
And what large capital is doing is accumulating capital. They're not particularly interested in the impacts of that.
Right.
And that's, in a way, it's their task, it's their responsibility in capitalist society, is accumulation. It's not particularly interested in what happens to afterwards. They are only interested when they when the economy crashes. And then they say, well, we have to do something because their reproduction process is stopped. And so now they are concerned in Mozambique. And they are all attacking the government. They are all criticizing the government. But they are the ones who didn't pay taxes. And they are the ones who brought lending, irresponsible lending. They are the ones who say we can control the country, we don't need government and so on, in the boom period.
Right.
Now that
now it's turning around and saying,
everybody
you are
goes,
responsible,
yeah.
you mismanaged.
So it's very important for governments to learn that capital is not an ally of the government.
Yeah.
It's an opportunistic, parasitic ally of the government.
Yeah.
It's not a strategic ally of the government.
Right.
Yeah? And so in the bad periods, you are going to be accountable to the same capital that you supported in the good period.
Exactly.
The second point I think it's very important is don't ever think that this can't happen to you.
Exactly.
Don't ever think that.
Right.
10 years ago, we were discussing the situation of Nigeria, the situation of Angola, and saying Mozambique needs to be careful. Please, let's not go that road. Oh, look at this, look at that, and pointing to the problems. And we were always told it will never happen to us because we are special, because we have learned the lessons from the others, and so on. And then it happened.
It has happened, yes.
Sometimes even worse than it happened to the others. So never think it can't happen to you, because it will if you don't act.
Right.
And if you don't act early enough.
Absolutely.
And the only way to act successfully is to have a systemic understanding of what the nature of the problem is. In other words, it means, in more academic words, in taking your words, quoting you, you need a good theory. A good theory that is, being good means it's practical.
Yeah.
So it's a good theory that explains the systemic functioning of the economy, what the key issues, the key questions are coming out of this analysis, and how we should focus our work, our action, in order to correct, push things forward, transform when it's possible. When it's not possible to transform, at least correct, adjust.
Absolutely.
Yeah? But never think it can't happen to you because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Remember, it's just that it hasn't happened yet, nothing else.
Right.
Yeah. We 10 years ago we were saying it's not going to happen to us.
Absolutely. I'm really thankful to you, and this is what, in a very small way, we have been trying to do at the Nyeri Resource Center, to give our young people the theoretical frameworks, the theory which can help us to understand our reality, and therefore to be able to plan our practical actions. Thank you very much, Professor, and we'll have another opportunity and continue. Thank you.